San Antonio, Texas is a city cloaked in the shadows of its haunted past. From the iconic Alamo, where the spirits of the fallen echo through time, to the ancient Spanish missions holding centuries-old secrets, every corner tells a chilling tale. The Riverwalk's serene beauty conceals phantom footsteps, while historic neighborhoods harbor restless souls and mysterious encounters. San Antonio stands as one of the most haunted destinations in the United States. Hey there folks, and welcome back to my channel. Tonight I've got a spooky story to share with you all. It's a tale of supernatural encounters, so grab your popcorn and settle in because this is going to give you goosebumps. The San Antonio State Hospital was once known as the Southwestern Insane Asylum and has a history shrouded in horrors. Established in 1892, it was built to accommodate the growing number of mentally ill patients in the region. Over the years, rumors of unexplained phenomena and unsettling occurrences have long haunted its halls. I remember the first day I stepped into the San Antonio State Hospital. The air felt heavy as I passed through the towering gates. The sprawling, red-brick buildings looked foreboding against the setting sun, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and pull me into their depths. As a new nurse, I was eager to prove myself and provide the best care possible for the patients. But as I walked through those dimly lit corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Whispers seemed to echo from the walls, and every creak and groan of the old building sent my heart racing. It wasn't long before I heard the stories. The ones about patients who vanished without a trace, their empty beds the only evidence they had ever been there. Some claimed to have seen figures darting in and out of the shadows, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of anguish. Others spoke of strange noises that filled the night. I tried to dismiss these tales as the products of overactive imaginations, but as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't deny the unease that settled in my bones. Patients would often stare into the distance, their eyes glazed with a terror I couldn't comprehend. They mumbled about things that lurked in the darkness. One night, as I made my rounds, I heard a peculiar scratching sound coming from one of the patients' rooms. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The air felt charged with an otherworldly energy, and I fought the urge to flee. With a shaky breath, I pushed the door open, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. In the pale moonlight, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure huddled in the corner, its form contorted and twisted. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its fingers scraped against the walls, leaving deep gouges in the paint. The stench of decay filled the room, and I gagged, unable to tear my gaze away from the grotesque sight. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure let out a screech, and as I turned to run, I felt a searing pain shoot up my leg. I collapsed to the ground, my vision swimming with terror. I glanced down to see long, skeletal fingers wrapped around my ankle. With a surge of adrenaline, I kicked and thrashed, finally breaking free from its grasp. I scrambled to my feet and bolted out of the room. As I reached the safety of the well-lit hallway, I dared to look back, only to find the room empty, the scratching sound fading into the night. From that day on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I prepared to leave the hospital for the last time, I couldn't help but wonder what would become of those who stayed behind. The Sheraton Gunter had a daunting history, and tonight, that history would unfold in a way I never expected. It was a chilly evening when I started my shift as a housekeeper at the hotel. As the grandiose lobby echoed with the clinking of glasses and the murmur of guests, I made my way down the dimly lit corridors. I had heard whispers among the staff about room 636, the infamous site of a gruesome murder that allegedly took place in 1965. The tale went that a man named Walter Emmerich had brought a lady back to his room one fateful night. A couple of days later, a maid entered the room to find a horrifying scene. Blood smeared across the walls and floor, with Walter standing next to the bed. The story went that he hastily gathered the blood-soaked sheets and fled the room, leaving behind a chilling mystery. As I approached room 636 that evening, an odd sense of fear washed over me. The air felt heavier, and the dim light in the hallway flickered. With my cleaning cart in tow, I hesitated for a moment before inserting the key and pushing open the creaky door. The room greeted me in silence, but the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken tension. The curtain swayed gently, revealing a glimpse of the city lights outside. I shook off the eerie feeling and got to work, methodically changing the sheets and arranging the room as per my routine. As I reached for the vacuum cleaner, a subtle creak caught my attention. I turned toward the source of the sound, and my heart skipped a beat. The walls seemed to be oozing with a dark, viscous substance. It was blood. Panic surged through my veins and I stumbled backward, my eyes fixed on the ghastly scene unfolding before me. The room had transformed into a chamber of horror and I could almost hear the echoes of the past. The air was tainted with the metallic scent of blood and I could feel the weight of the unspeakable tragedy that had stained these walls. I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the horrific display. Suddenly, a figure materialized beside the bed. It was Walter Emmerich, his eyes filled with a haunting despair. He clutched the blood-soaked sheets in his hands, staring at me as if pleading for understanding. In a desperate attempt to escape the nightmarish vision, I fumbled for the door, my trembling hands struggling to turn the handle. The room seemed to resist, as if reluctant to release its grip on me. But with a final, determined push, I stumbled out into the hallway. Breathing heavily, I leaned against the door, my mind reeling from the surreal encounter. I glanced back, half expecting the horror to follow me into the corridor. Yet, to my astonishment, the door to room 636 stood innocently closed, as if mocking the terror that had unfolded within. I took a moment to collect myself before cautiously re-entering the room. To my disbelief, the blood-soaked nightmare had vanished without a trace. The walls were pristine, the air devoid of the metallic stench. It was as if the room had never been tainted by the specter of its gruesome past. Confused and shaken, I completed my cleaning duties, leaving room 636 behind as a puzzling enigma. As I exited the hotel that night, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had glimpsed into a realm where the echoes of a long-buried tragedy still lingered. The Emily Morgan Hotel, standing tall and ominous, is known as one of the most haunted places in the United States. Built in 1924 as the city's medical arts building until 1976, its history reeks of a darker past. The basement, once a cold and sterile morgue, adds an extra layer of chilling tales to this haunted haven. One evening, I found myself a temporary resident of this ghostly abode. The lobby was grand and the atmosphere whispered secrets of a bygone era. I decided to explore the city and with that in mind, entered one of the hotel's ancient elevators. As the doors closed, I noticed the fading brass plaque that hinted at the Emily Morgan's morbid past. The elevator began its descent, the floor numbers decreasing steadily. When it reached the ground floor, I expected the doors to open, but they didn't. Instead, the elevator continued its descent, taking me to the ominous basement. As the elevator doors reluctantly slid open in the dimly lit basement, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. I needed to find the stairs to escape this eerie descent. As I wandered, I stumbled upon a room, its door slightly ajar. A feeble light emanated from within. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I cautiously stepped into the room. The sight that met my eyes terrified me. Mortuary chambers lined the walls, relics of a time when the hotel harbored the deceased. Panic set in as I turned to leave, but then a creak echoed in the room. One of the mortuary chamber doors was slowly swinging open. Whispers, soft and coaxing, emerged from the open chamber, inviting me closer. A chill came over me as I hesitated. The dim light flickered, and in that moment, the chamber door swung wide open, revealing a metal table protruding from the wall. Fear surged through me as I turned and ran. It felt like a shadow was chasing me just inches away. When I mustered the courage to glance back, the hallway was empty, but faint whispers lingered in the darkness, urging me to keep running. Heart pounding, I sprinted through the maze of the basement, desperately searching for an escape. The whispers continued, almost guiding me to safety. Finally, I stumbled upon the stairs, and without looking back, I ascended, leaving the haunted depths behind. I reached the safety of the upper floors, gasping for breath. I couldn't comprehend what lurked in that basement. Whether it was a lingering spirit or a manifestation of the Emily Morgan Hotel's gruesome past. I remember when I first heard about the legend of San Pedro Springs Park. You see, the park itself had a history older than my grandma's stories. It was the second oldest park in the United States, with its roots going back all the way to the 1700s. People used to say it was a place of tranquility and joy, a spot where families would gather and kids would run around, laughing and playing. But there was a whisper that crept through the town, something that the older folks would tell the kids to scare them into behaving. They talk about the legend, the one that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up even on the hottest San Antonio summer day. It was said that there was something dark, something twisted, that lurked in the shadows of the old oak trees, something that had been there long before the swings and the slides were installed. I was never one to believe in ghost stories or tall tales. But one fateful night, when the moon was high and the stars were hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, I found myself in San Pedro Springs Park. It was a dare, a silly bet with my friends. They said that I wouldn't have the guts to spend the night there alone. I laughed it off, thinking it was all a big joke. But as I settled down on the cold bench, the laughter faded and the eerie silence took its place. The park, usually alive with the sounds of children's laughter and families chatting, was now silent. The swings swayed gently in the breeze, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the ground. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that the stories were nothing but fiction spun by bored minds. But then, in the distance, I heard a sound, a soft rustling that seemed to come from the heart of the park. My heart pounded in my chest as I peered into the darkness, my eyes straining to make out any movement. And that's when I saw it, a figure barely discernible in the moonlight, standing by the edge of the old oak tree. It was tall, unnaturally so, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch into the night. My throat went dry and I couldn't move or even scream for help. It just stood there, its form swaying ever so slightly as if it were dancing to a tune only it could hear. I wanted to run, to flee as fast as my legs could carry me, but fear rooted me to the spot. The figure seemed to sense my terror, and with an unholy screech that pierced the night, it began to move towards me. Its steps were slow, deliberate, each one sending a jolt of dread through my body. I could make out its features now, a contorted face, twisted in agony with eyes that glowed a fiery red. I don't know how I found the strength, but I managed to break free from the grip of fear and sprinted across the park, my feet pounding against the ground. I didn't dare look back as I didn't want to see if it was still following me. It felt like an eternity before I reached the edge of the park, my breath ragged, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. I stumbled onto the street, gasping for air, my mind reeling from the encounter. The legend of San Pedro Springs Park was no longer just a tale told to scare children. It was real, and it was something that I hoped to never encounter again. As I made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. I used to work the graveyard shift at the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas. Weird occurrences always happened at night, but nothing like the story I'm about to tell you. Before we get started, let me give you a little bit of history on this place. The Alamo began as a mission in 1718 and was later the site of a terrible battle. Many people perished during this gruesome battle between the Mexican army and the Texans. This was a pivotal event in the Texas Revolution. Now back to my story. One night, while I was patrolling the grounds of the Alamo, I heard a loud noise coming from inside of the fortress. The sound echoed through the stillness of the night. As I cautiously stepped into the building, I saw nothing. Then all of a sudden, the doors slammed shut and locked behind me, leaving me trapped inside with no apparent way out. Panic began to rise as I frantically searched for the usual exits, but to no avail. I slowly approached one of the windows and peered out, only to witness a ghostly reenactment of the brutal battle that had taken place in 1836. The shadows of the past danced before my eyes, the echoes of gunshots and battle cries reverberating through the air. My heart raced as I realized that I was witnessing a terrifying echo of history come to life. Just as I began to believe I was alone, I heard distinct footsteps approaching from behind. I turned around and noticed what appeared to be an apparition holding a flickering lantern. Its hollow eyes fixed on me with an unnatural intensity that froze me in place. Before I could react, the ghostly figure swung at me with an unknown object, sending me crashing to the ground. Dazed and disoriented, I lay there, trying to make sense of what was happening. The dark figure loomed over me, and I braced myself for another blow, but my senses began to fade as darkness enveloped my vision. The next morning, I awoke in my post as if nothing had happened the night before. My body ached, but the memories of the encounter remained vivid and terrifying. Haunted by the traumatic experience, I resigned from the job, unable to bear the thought of returning to those haunted grounds another night. The night was thick with darkness as me and my friend, Jake, decided to take a stroll through Comanche Lookout Park. It was a place people said was haunted, full of whispers from a time long gone. The park had a history, they said. A history of ancient Native American tribes, their spirits lingering in the shadows. We laughed off the spooky tales as we ambled along the narrow dirt path, surrounded by the dense trees. The moon a dim glow in the sky. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth, and the silence felt louder than the crickets chirping in the distance. As we made our way toward the lookout point, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. Jake, the Joker, dismissed my unease with a casual quip. "Just your imagination," he said, nudging me with his elbow. But the shadows continued to play tricks on us. The outlines of figures like ancient warriors seemed to materialize and disappear among the trees. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just my imagination running wild. But the unsettling feeling persisted. Reaching the lookout point, we stood on the edge, gazing at the city lights twinkling below. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a distant, haunting melody. It sounded like the faint chanting of Native Americans. Suddenly, the shadows took form again. The figures of Native Americans emerged, lining the path we had just walked. Panic seized us as we turned to flee, but our legs felt like they were made of lead. The chief of the tribe, adorned in feathered headdress and painted symbols, stepped forward. His eyes bored into us. We were frozen, unable to escape the gaze of the ghostly tribe. The chief advanced toward Jake, who stood rooted to the spot. Fear clenched my chest as the chief leaped at him with a ghostly intensity. Jake, caught off guard, lost his balance and tumbled over the edge. A gut-wrenching scream escaped his lips as he fell into the darkness below. Miraculously, Jake managed to grab hold of a root protruding from the cliffside. Panic surged through me as I rushed to the edge, desperately trying to pull him up. The chief and his tribe stood silent, watching with indifference. As I strained to save Jake, the wind carried away the chanting of the tribe. When we finally managed to pull him to safety, we turned to face the specters, but they were gone. The forest was once again still, the only sound the rustling leaves and our labored breaths. We fled the park, our hearts pounding in our chests. The echoes of the tribe's chanting lingered in the wind, haunting us as we stumbled out into the safety of the city lights. We never ventured back to Comanche Lookout Park after dark, forever haunted by our encounter. The legend of Woman Hollering Creek in San Antonio, Texas, had always intrigued us. Whispers of La Llorona, the weeping woman, echoed through the town, cautioning those who dared to visit the creek after dark. Despite the chilling tales, my 3 friends and I, fueled by youthful bravado, decided to explore the mysterious waters one ominous night. The air hung heavy with an eerie stillness as we cautiously made our way along the creek bank. The moon barely managed to pierce through the thick canopy of trees. Stories of La Llorona, a ghostly woman mourning the loss of her children, lingered in the back of our minds. As we continued along the creek, the distant weeping gradually became audible. It was a haunting sound that began to frighten us. We exchanged nervous glances but pressed on, compelled by morbid curiosity. Suddenly, from the impenetrable blackness emerged a spectral figure. A woman, her ethereal form cloaked in tattered garments, her face obscured by a veil of sorrow. The air turned frigid as she drifted towards us, her mournful cries growing louder. "My children," she wailed, her voice a haunting melody that resonated with unfathomable grief. "Help me find my children." My friends and I were petrified, rooted to the spot as her ghostly presence loomed nearer. Panic set in as we grappled with the realization that we were face to face with La Llorona herself. She begged us to aid in her desperate search. Terrified, we stumbled backward, our footsteps quickening. The weeping woman followed, her cries echoing through the night as the legend had come to life before our very eyes. The ghostly encounter would forever haunt our memories. A chilling reminder that some legends are best left undisturbed. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel for more spooky content like this.